Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the best recordings of Prokofiev's Alexander Nevsky, the fabulous cantata that he derived from the film score to the Eisenstein film of the same name. I'm sure many of you have seen the film. It was the movie from which the Star Wars stormtrooper helmet things came from originally. It's really a fabulous, fabulous movie in the classic Soviet, not Russian, Soviet tradition. And the score that Prokofiev wrote is absolutely magnificent. And the first thing we need to deal with in talking about recordings is that original film score, because it was recorded by Yuri Timirkanov, and very, very well on RCA, but I do not recommend it as a performance of Alexander Nevsky, the cantata, because the film score, like most film scores that were later bashed into suite form, is extremely repetitive and long-winded for what it is. And it matches the movie perfectly. But that battle on the ice goes on forever. It's like a good half the movie. And it just won't quit. And you hear the same stuff over and 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 get the point? You see what I mean? So while some of you may love the original film score and may enjoy it, I just cannot recommend it as an independent artistic entity. The cantata is the independent artistic entity. It has shape, not exactly form, maybe pushing it, but it has a bunch of pithy and extremely atmospheric and evocative movements, and that battle lasts just as long as it needs to. Prokofiev knew what he was doing. So, with that said, what do great performances of Alexander Nevsky need? Well, first I need to tell you a couple of these preferred recordings are sung in English. For some reason, I don't see Nevsky sung in like French or German or some other languages, but English, yeah, because we like it here and we like our film music. And so there's an English translation. I don't think it makes any difference, but this is my personal preference. I really don't think it matters because, first of all, you're not going to understand a word of what anyone's saying. And second of all, the text is extremely rudimentary. There are very few words that need to be sung. They are in the most obvious sort of patriotic, boosterism. So they don't really make any difference what they say. And then, of course, most of it, that is the important part, is in Latin. And the Latin part is really the most fun, and it's in Latin no matter what language the rest of it's in. And when I performed Nevsky, here's one of the things about Nevsky that's really interesting. You would think that it's for a big chorus and a huge orchestra that it's hard to do. It's not. It's actually very simple. It's very easy to do. What you need is a great brass and percussion section. Everybody else is along for the ride. Yeah, occasionally there's a woodwind solo, and the strings do a lot of tremolos and atmospheric movie music things. You gotta have the brass and you gotta have the percussion. And if you've got that, you've got Alexander Nevsky. So we did it in my community orchestra with a rather small string section and a very small chorus. And we all just sang along, those of us who knew it. And the battle on the ice was really fun because I was in the back whacking and smashing and crashing and screaming out, Peregrinus expectavi pedes meos in cymbalis. I mean, it's really easy and really fun. Most of the choral bits are in unison. You can ask the audience to sing along if you want. There's a couple tricky parts. The part in the last movement for the women, that sounds like jingle bells, dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh, all the fields we go, because it's got all that little snowy percussive writing in it for glockenspiel and xylophone and whatnot. But it's actually incredibly straightforward. It really is. And that's the problem with recordings, because all you need to do a great Alexander Nevsky is play the living crap out of it. You just bash and crash your way through it, and it's going to sound great. Amazing, then, that so few performances manage to figure that out. They just don't have the gumption. They don't have the percussion. They don't make enough noise. The piece is about noise. It's a film score. There's one sensitive moment really in the entire piece, which is, of course, the Lament for the Dead after the battle on the ice. And there, it is nice to have a Russian singer, or that is a singer in the Russian language. Let's put it that way, because usually you have your choice. You get either the wobbly Russian singer, or you have a really nice mezzo who's not singing in Russian, but sometimes you get a really nice mezzo who is singing in Russian. That is the one moment where the text and the language you could argue matters, but I don't make an issue of that. I truly don't. And so I am not going to make an issue of what language these recordings are in. Most of them are in Russian. One of the best is not, and we'll get to that when we get to that. Otherwise, it's all just straight going. But it really is kind of astonishing how many mediocre recordings there are of this, just because they're not powerful and exciting enough. I mean, if it doesn't blow the roof off of your house, there's just no point in Alexander Nevsky. So I'm going to get through these recordings very quickly. This is not going to be a long talk. We are going to do the so-so versions. I'm just going to show you some of them as exemplars of the so-so-ness prevalent in Alexander Nevsky recordings, and I'll ignore all the rest of them and just tell you what the good ones are. I think I've got like 7 of them here that are really worth considering. And the rest of them, well, they're okay. They sound fine until you hear one of the really great ones. And then they don't sound so fine anymore. That's what happens. So let's talk about the meh Alexander Nevskys quickly. We'll just get them out of the way. Here's one that I have for a very particular reason. Is Zdenek Matzal on Cost Classics with the Milwaukee Symphony Orchestra and Chorus. It's not bad at all, but it is a typical example of how so many blockbuster sonic labels turned to this piece to show off their blockbuster sonics and then didn't deliver a blockbuster performance of the piece. And that, and that's the whole point. Yes, there's a certain blockbusterosity to the music, but if the performance doesn't proceed with pedal to the metal all the way through, then it doesn't matter how great the sonics are. Great sonics. It's a slightly tepid performance. So is this one on Dorian with the Dallas Symphony Orchestra under Eduardo Mata. You would think. Mata was actually a superb conductor in this sort of colorful French-styled music, but he's just a little elegant. He was always a little elegant, a little bit soft-edged, and so he is here. And the same is true also. I don't have to hold it up. You get the point. The other big sort of audiophile version was on reference recordings, and with the Utah Symphony, and that was another one where it just doesn't have the oomph in the big moments, however fabulous the sonics are. And sometimes when you have fabulous sonics, that can count against you because their fabulousness only shows you how tepid the actual playing and performance and interpretation are. So beware of the sonic blockbuster Nevskys. The best ones, it actually sounds great, probably because so much of it's like in unison. It actually sounds great when it's not a sonic blockbuster, when it's just normally recorded and decent sound. It makes a much, much better impression than a tepid performance in fabulous sound. Believe you me. And I think the evidence will pile up as we go through these. Then we have, this thing. This was Court Mazur with the Gewandhaus. If ever there was an orchestra that should not play Alexander Nevsky, it's the Gewandhaus. Especially when under Mazur, when they were just so tepid so often. I mean, they had their exceptions. They did some cool stuff like the Liszt tone poems and stuff like that. But quite often as not, when it really comes from that hard-hitting stuff, they just didn't have the power. They never did. They were never known for that. The Gewandhaus was an orchestra of subtleties. And if there is ever a piece that does not require subtleties, it is Alexander Nevsky, or the Scythian Suite for that matter, which is the coupling. And then there's this one on Naxos with Eva Podlish, who's a wonderful mezzo singing the Lament. This is with the Orchestra Nationale de Lille and the Latvian State Choir, which is also excellent, under Jean-Claude Casadessus. It just is a bit stiff, a little unexciting, and that does it for that. It's so simple. Isn't this easy? I love it when it's easy. It doesn't have to be complicated. And then there was this one that really was such a disappointment to me. This was the Chyenne with Cleveland. Chyenne did great stuff. Cleveland did great Prokofiev with Ashkenazi. I wish he'd recorded it with them. But first of all, when this came out, I was very annoyed because that's all that's on the disc. So it's a 36-minute long CD. It's not a terribly long piece. And second of all, it's another performance. It has a very good battle on the ice, but it has sort of a glary, glassy early digital recording, and it just doesn't have the necessary punch. And remember what a slam bang job they did with The Rite of Spring with Chyenne. So why was Nevsky so tepid? Again, I just think some conductors try to achieve subtlety and sophistication and shades when Prokofiev wants the shock and awe treatment. That's all you want. So with that said, let's now turn to the better versions, and we'll get through the whole thing rather simply. First, there's Reiner. This is the one that's in English. It doesn't make any difference. In those days, in the 60s and 50s, in the United States, if you did this at all, it was in English, because Ormandy also did it in English. And Ormandy's version is terrific on RCA, but only if it gets remastered, because it sounds like a glockenspiel and xylophone concerto as it currently exists, but it's a wonderful performance. And, if they get the sound fixed, maybe that'll be a contender too. But it's in English. And you know what? Who cares? It's Reiner. It's Chicago. It's a real ball buster of a performance. To be frank, I would have wanted a little more forward motion in the battle on the ice, but otherwise, it's just a great recording with all of Reiner's typical clarity and no nonsense, straight ahead vigor and earthiness, and it's just terrific. So this is the RCA Living Stereo remastering. It's in the Reiner box. It's all over the place. You can probably find it without too much difficulty. This one is coupled with the Cacciatorian Violin Concerto with Leonid Kogan in the Boston Symphony in Monteux, which is not too unattractive a coupling. It's a very good coupling, actually. So yes, that's worth considering. Also worth considering, and Charles with the Czech Philharmonic. He was such a great Prokofiev conductor. Remember, we talked about his Romeo and Juliet, which is just staggeringly intense. I mean, he makes the suite from Romeo and Juliet into one of the great tragic utterances in Western music, and he does the same with Nevsky. It does not have the most powerful or best sonics or any of them, but the intensity is there. Get it? That's what the piece has to have. And Ernst and the Czech Phil in this stuff were just unbeatable. They really were. And you also get the symphony concerto for cello and orchestra, and one of that work's great performances. With Vera? No, it's not Vera Sukopova. It's the alto with Andrei Navarra. A very, very fine performance of a grossly neglected but very difficult to pull off piece of music. So yes, and Charles the Czech Phil are definitely worth considering. And you get the chorus, the Czech chorus. Oh my God, they sound wonderful. They are one of the great Eastern European choruses. Remember, we talked about them in the Stravinsky Symphony of Psalms. Yeah, boy, is that intense too. Next, really a classic, Thomas Schipper's. I don't know if you can still find this one. This is on Sony. And it's on Sony Retrospective. I don't know where this thing came from or what kind of a label this was or who was doing this, but it's Thomas Schipper's with the New York Philharmonic. Sounds great. It's recorded around 61. It's coupled with the Dmitri Mitropoulos Romeo and Juliet suites, which are also terrific, or sweet. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful record. This is another one of those exemplars that tells you you don't have to have the best demonstration quality sonics if you've got the passion. And if you've got the passion, and if you've got the noise quality, the rawness, the edge that the music absolutely positively demands. So Schipper's is a very, very, I just love this performance. I really think it ought to be, we need a Schipper's box. Don't we, folks? We really need a Schipper's box. I vote for the Schipper's box. Come on, Sony, let's do a Schipper's box. I think that Sony may have been shocked by the amount of the quantity or their ease with which they get rid of these limited edition boxed sets, because we classical people have very long memories. Remember, we're classical. We remember back to the 16th century. And so, when we see some of these things come out that have been gone forever, that we had in our collections way back when, that we've told our grandchildren about, well, we buy them, we get them, and there hasn't been any systematic treatment of shippers ever, I don't think, or in like a billion years. So that would be something that I think would have surprisingly good sales, because Shippers was a very, very fine conductor, and his death was a real tragic loss to the biz. And his Nevsky is quite wonderful. His Barber disc was wonderful, and then he did a bunch of opera recordings that were terrific. He was really good. It would be nice to have some attention given to Mr. Shippers. Next, Previn with the LSO. Now, this is in the box that has the ballets plus Ivan the Terrible with Muti, which is also pretty cool. You know, and Prokofiev never Nevskyvated Ivan the Terrible. He should have Nevskyvated Ivan the Terrible, turned it into another concert piece, because as it is, you play the score and do your best with it. But that's a fine performance too. It has lots of good things in it. But this Nevsky is excellent. It was from the classic period of Previn's engagement with the LSO. It was wonderfully recorded by the EMI engineers. And Previn had a real feel for this music, possibly because he was a film score composer himself. And he knew when to put his foot on the gas, as it were. And this is a pretty gaseous performance. It has all of the necessary oomph, and it's very well played, very well sung, very well recorded, and it's a very exciting Nevsky. Very, very good. Also, Previn, again, this time on Telarc. Now, by the time he got to the Los Angeles Philharmonic, Previn had slowed down considerably in some of his performances. He was more thoughtful, and it could have counted against him. But it doesn't here, because this is one blockbuster recording which catches a blockbuster performance. Not a fast performance, but a powerful performance. And like I said, if the power is there, the speed doesn't matter as much. Nothing else matters as much. This is really stunningly recorded, and it's not going to take the place of the more visceral sort of, blood and guts versions, but there's plenty of blood and plenty of guts splattered all over the field of the dead here, and it's a beautiful, beautiful performance. I really, really enjoyed this. I still take it out periodically and listen to it. It's wonderful just to listen to it. And the LA Phil was playing it really in top form for a lot of Previn's tenure. Very, very good. So that's great. Now the top two are, well, maybe somewhat predictable, because I think that there were certain conductors who could just do this sort of stuff, who took it seriously enough to play it literally, meaning without any kind of excessive subtlety or perfume. One of those, the guy is Nimi Järvi. Nimi Järvi is the ultimate pedal-to-the-metal conductor. And these Chandos Prokofiev recordings, wow, they were pedal-to-the-metal performances, all of them. He did the best Prokofiev symphony cycle. He did all kinds of ballets and other stuff. They are all fabulous recordings. And his Nevsky is right up there. This is one of those, just let it rip. And it does. It rips, it tears, it shreds, it smokes, it sizzles, it fries. It does all of the outdoor barbecue things you want to happen in a great performance of this piece. And you also get, the Scythian suite and the suite from Le Pas d'Acier, the steel dance, or the steel step, as it's sometimes called. I like it when they call it the steel dance, because when you call it the steel step, which is technically what pas is, a step, but it's footstep as in dance. It's not step as in staircase, which is how we normally think about it in English. But yes, the Chandos recording is hot, hot, hot. And so that's one that you absolutely have to hear. However, the best Alexander Nevsky, Peregrinus, Expectavi, Pedes Meos, and Cymbalis is, and always has been, perhaps surprisingly, Abbado. Because Abbado was one of those guys who tended to micromanage things, not so much during his LSO period, though. That's the point. When he was with the LSO, he did it less, number one, and number two, Nevsky doesn't allow you anything to micromanage. It's all just in unison. It's just a big, loud explosion of sound with sensitivity, of course, in the Lament. And Abbado takes it seriously. He takes it very seriously in a good way. He's a literalist in this performance. And he lets the LSO, which is a fabulous film score orchestra. I always used to love it when Gramophone used to say, the slick Hollywood sound of the American orchestras, when of course all of the Hollywood film scores like Star Wars were recorded with the London Symphony, because that was the Hollywood sound in stereo, at least since the 80s, the 70s and the 80s. It was all the LSO, and boy are they great in this, and they are fabulously well recorded by DG. They made some of their best sounding records ever with Abato in London, and this was before the digital era, so it's a nice analog, big, rich, juicy, with the most exciting battle on the ice ever recorded. And you get Elena Abratsova, I believe it's Elena Abratsova with her erstwhile vibrato held somewhat in check, singing the Lament, and a terrific chorus, and a wonderful tam-tam, and just fantastically noisy, exciting, take no prisoners, punch it in the gut Nevsky. And it comes fabulously coupled on this originals disc, with the Scythian Suite and Lieutenant DJ, both of which are just fabulous. Absolutely first class. Those are with Chicago, and those are really pulverizing as well. Of course, they're in the Abato. Nevsky is in the Abato LSO box. And the other two, well, you can find them hovering around because DG saw fit to parcel out Abato. And so he's floating amongst many boxes. But if you can get the originals, this is the way to get it, because you get all three works. And it's just one of the great Prokofiev discs in the history of Prokofiosity. And that, my friends, is the story of Alexander Nevsky. Like I said, couldn't be simpler. Keep on listening, folks. Thanks for joining me. Take care.